What am I? What are we anyways? What am I? What are we anyways? Well, hi there. Nice to see you all again. Oh, I see some of my old friends are around still. Sai, Nai. Oh, Hannah, Bill. Oh, Tanya's here too. Good. Pupinder, you're coming every time now. That's nice. Glad to have you all. Hope you're getting something out of these explications, these talks. Today we're talking about the further externalization of speech. The further externalization of speech. Something amazing, revolutionary, transformative happened to the human species quite recently, and not from a particularly conscious decision, as usual. It had causes that were scarcely noted, and species profound effects everywhere, and has created and speeded up the radically word-i-fied environment that we live in, that in turn creates us and our minds. Indeed, it mutated and repurposed inner speech in ways that were completely unpredicted. And even today, we scarcely know how it works, how it has turned out. Thinking and knowledge have been radically externalized in the last 500 years in powerful and previously undreamt of ways. Words and thoughts are cerebral forms of serially linked, rule-constrained, connected analogues that, as mentioned above, we hear in our heads. But then, gradually, much after inner speech extended itself as outer speech, we learned that words, also analogues, can also be instantiated as patterns in various media. Clan-generated words were primordially produced as complex patterns in the brain that attached to consistent phonologies that were vocalized among us. They became more or less standardized, reliably reproducible, and sharable. After millennia, someone experimented with imprinting squiggles into clay, or brushing pictures, and then phonetic analogues onto kinds of paper. And after a long while, someone else thought to industrialize this printing and reproduce these analogues of thought in large runs via the printing press. External embodiment. Being externalized in the environment partially means that analogic data can be manipulated by the mind in new and quite unique ways, leveraging the environment. We've seen that thoughts, words, metaphors are analogues of things and experiences. These analogues, or tokens of internal speech, were eventually over time externalized as outer speech. When we examine the way the environment itself became the matrix of information of so many sorts, we realize that much is actually processed outside the skull. Mark Rowlands and many others have opened up a beginning discussion of extended knowledge and what he calls embodied cognition. Observation of how we do simple arithmetic, paper and pencil, and then how we use our environment and machines in just about all computations, and also everyday behaviors, change radically how we understand what the brain, what an individual's brain, is doing. But in a much, much wider domain, the embodiment of knowledge is a deep intuition and a key to comprehending the nature of human knowledges of every kind. Let's begin to look at this. How peoples without developed written culture communicate is full and effective and has been our history for 99% of the last 120,000 or so years. Yet the mind, limited to the spoken verbal medium and isolated individual sharings of locally expressed and shared inner speech and off-the-cuff remembered knowledges, operates in quite specific ways and under extreme limitations. The individual's working memory is rather limited. At a very abstract level, working memory must keep words and phrases alive long enough to be further processed, linked, and compared, and further examined and linked to other corresponding words, phrases. This is true for each individual, and it's true for the group. It's the nature of thinking. In a strictly oral culture, these two limitations, words, phrases being individually retained inside the skull of a few individuals, and the lack of stable, usable knowledges that bottleneck because of relatively scarce working memory. These two limitations are profound and may severely limit the accumulation of advanced knowledges of every kind. Remember, we're not talking about the 1 or 2 in a million geniuses with uncharacteristic mental capabilities. We're talking about the behavior and capabilities of average individuals under lived circumstances. Archaic societies, like a few of today's still non-literate, simpler societies, didn't have a culture of written communication. Also, until very recent times, only a tiny fraction of any population even participated in the written exchange of ideas. The process of 99% of human individuals retrieving and thinking about ideas, technologies, and experience without the help of the written word is categorically different than what has developed over the past 500 years. Let's call it naturalistic knowledge of the historical past, of everyday technologies, pottery, farming, house building, of health and general behaviors. Knowledge, stories, and cultural myths were remembered by individuals and small groups, guilds, and passed on orally. Even high-functioning humans can only hold quite limited knowledge in their pretty fallible memories. Without the extension of information and data provided by writing, individual brains can only work on rationalizing, comparing, and testing, finding new patterns in the chunks of information that come to them from their verbal cultures. And I remind you again that historically, in previous epochs, Average individuals had quite short average lifetimes, somewhat malnutrition stunted bodies, much brutality, and some severe superstitions that the tribe is easily seduced by. Compare, for example, Napoleon Chagnon's explication of life among the Yanomami. But essentially, there was a profound limitation on what the individual could process. And the brain had not been conformed to chunk knowledge in the manner that modern brains are conformed. Knowledge is somewhat accurate historic memories, or even a coherent sense of the past, science knowledge, or even a rudimentary level of linked naturalistic stories. And importantly, technology knowledges around food production, health and welfare, childbirth, healthy development of children, etc. These knowledges developed slowly and were passed on by word of mouth and group fusion in informal guilds and cultural sharings. There is no intention of criticism or denigrating here. History can be no other way than history is. What we're working towards is a radical shift in how the species grogs the world and how a change in technology mutates the core processes of language information processing from top to bottom. Writing is just beginning to take hold in Europe for the tiny fraction of humanity. The Dark Ages are finally more or less over for the privileged classes, and Gutenberg's revolution in printing begins amid an uptick in new economic complexification. The meme begins its modern epidemiological spread. The virus of thought is on the verge of finding a very effective vehicle to infect many, many more unsuspecting minds. The steps are thusly. Thoughts and thought tokens, words, are implanted by mommy, daddy, by family or culture generally. Groups learn to create and share experiences by vocalization. Culture, brain co-created in the head abstraction becomes sharable and group exploitable. But linked words, the essence of inner speech, are culture created inside outside the skull tokens that can also be expressed in myriad ways. Spoken words map and broadcast inner speech. It is discovered that a man's thoughts can not only be shared by actual articulation to bystanders, but it also may be mapped and fixed on paper. But it is obviously a completely different medium. Squiggles on paper are fixed in space and extended through time, unlike spoken ephemera. They can now be presented to me so I can hear another's thoughts and make them my own. The thoughts that George could hear in his own head and speak to his friends are fixed to some written media. Now Thomas can process the written word, hearing it in his mind. He can have the experience of listening to George, even if George is deceased. Up until this point, I have been able to hear your spoken thoughts and play them in my head, holding them in my mind through time, if somewhat imperfectly. Now, incarnated in black and white static squiggles and symbols, I can hear your thoughts in my head again and again. The individual and the local group, the village or tribe, and eventually the nation, the culture, slowly becomes able to codify and expand and work on themes of thoughts. Much larger groups of citizens could symbol process the same material in much more coherent ways than the individual ever could. Knowledges of every kind can now be extended in space and time so that more than one brain can process both the concrete and the abstract symbols. Thought can effectively be slowed down and even frozen. And now 2 or 20 or 2,000 minds can be locked on the same premises or story. Many people can now examine the same symbol field or go at it time and again at their leisure. This offers a much more robust form of verification and communal culling of dross. Is this accurate? Is this true? Should I believe this? And this almost immediately exponentially increases the meme pool, offers many more opportunities for expansive or more precise or novel metaphors to be attached to this series of thoughts. And soon enough, expanded processing of the ideas can, in turn, be fixed in writing, and others can cooperatively or competitively enter the process. A form of organic, brain-mediated iteration. The input becomes the output, which becomes the input. The word stream not only slowed, but was easily frozen. A mathematician or a chemist or a philosopher could stare at nicely chunked information, reread it 1,000 times, simplify and reposition modified phrasings or tweaked equations. Galileo's ruminations could be extended. His equations could be incarnated, become usable for so many more folk. Homo sapiens' extraordinary ability to recognize and manipulate patterns was brought to bear on the slowed down and even frozen in time communal word stream. And us everyday folk could pore over complex Shakespearean wordings to our heart's content. Listen to our local demagogue in the papers. Pore over our prayer books. And standardized texts, further channelized and codified and made more precise what the guild, the group, the pundits, and intellectual power individuals were meditating on. Individuals could focus attention, pore over, memorize, and automatize mental processes in ways never imagined, and ways that changed thinking itself. Stanislaus Dehaene's intuitions about the wordification of our innate yet quite circumscribed abilities to compare quantities, the simple biological basis of number, quantity, and eventually mathematical patternings, via the application of more and more precise symbols tokens, is of immense interest. And this process eventually evolves into our fabulously elaborated mathematical faculty by applying more and more finely differentiating word concept markers to the universal number line demarcations, to spatial relationships, etc., etc. Basic human primate genius, let's say a step or two above the apes and chimps, expands into a new dimension via word token mapping. Words and numbers proliferate, define and differentiate, and somehow allow a completely different experience of what was previously simple token symbol mappings. A new differentiation produces a new word metaphor that itself can be further analyzed and parsed and differentiated. Each realm of man, every sense, every need and interest in time becomes autonomous domains and realms of cognition. Does this not apply to the deepest domains of human knowledge and give coherent expression to why language became the most powerful force in evolution when it self-created the modern human word processing primate? Each special or simple ability, genius, faculty of Homo is encoded verbally. And the literal, physical noosphere extension of knowledge allowed the individual symbols and chunked groups of symbols, sentences, ideas, to be differentiated more and more minutely. And perforce, the individual symbols and chunked groups of symbols were shared and complexly loaded with more and diverse information. And then that output is then processed and repatterned by the guild, by the clan. The output, as said, quickly becomes input for the next processor in line. The population could specialize. The population could look at ideas longer. Its attention span increased. Groups of cobblers specialized. Groups of pundits specialized. Even sororities of whores could specialize. Groups of fighters specialized. Groups of blacksmiths specialized, etc., etc., etc. They, each group, developed specialized words, abstract, more precise and differentiated, and also novel elaborations of their experiences. Specialized words that encapsulated experiences verbally, and the encapsulations were more or less perfected by using the group intelligence to abstract truths, summating symbols. and share experiences. The lengthening of the attention span included vast expansion and extension of the species' long-term memory. And miraculously, all that is written becomes potentially immortal and available for all future generations to share in. Aristotle and Chaucer and Einstein will live forever, or as long as we perdure anyways. Think of today's troves of knowledges of every variety. Think of the ability to come back to ideas and parts of ideas recursively. Think of the chance to compare streams of concepts, experiences, and technologies across genres and modalities and over every time span. This is a key part of humanity's genius. Cross-modal patterning is a form of thinking that is truly generative and far more powerful than unimodal experiencing. And this became the center of gravity of much of human striving and human expression. We've already forgotten how only a few centuries ago there were only 50 books to a village of 400 souls. And that was all the outside words all these people had access to, those who could read at all. And furthermore, the majority of citizens had not been given either the thirst for wordplay, analysis, and story making, or even understood what the reward for such behaviors might be. For ordinary souls, much of the rest was gossip, small ideas of lust and family business, much less abstract than most of the ideas that every school child has crammed into their heads by grade 6. We seldom give this process its due. The synergy of medium and mind, the calling forth of new skills, the opening of new treasure troves of many kinds. I think this is because it's become so archetypally human and available to us almost from birth. It was long ago created by us, but has since created us in its image. It is what we are, and it has created our very mind selves, and therefore has become, like all constitutive sub-skills, almost invisible. By words, 2 or 10 of us hold on to an experience, or at least our abstract of that experience, our ideas of the experience, and bring our pooled brain power to bear and see and manipulate the idea of it, the abstraction of it. A classroom discussion, my book club, a focus group, reproducible, enduring word sketches that we work on together. My guild, our specialization, the community of physicists, playwrights, Sunni Muslims, electricians, etc. I think we forget that before Gutenberg, before the ritualization of sharing ideas, the individual heard something, maybe once or twice or a few times in his lifetime, then forgot it. That was it. The species wasn't working coherently on stable themes. It's like a mental accumulator came into being that perfects the experience of both the perceived world and the symbolized world. Knowledge was made extensible. Knowledge became an environment. Our brains engineered a media that it could process in a radically new manner, which is why education has become the coin of the realm in each and every domain, and why simpler, non-literate cultures simply cannot stand against the juggernaut of organized knowledges, and why reading, which is the only true portal into the newly elaborated universe of saved knowledges, is of such inestimable value to individuals and countries and cultures. To be stripped of this actually spanking brand new automata, reading, is profoundly debilitating. And this new way of being towards words allowed specialized groups, cobblers, pundits, whores, etc., to focus and refocus their thoughts on their own and on wider experiences. And in time, they wanted to know how to work better, perfect their crafts, input better so as to output better. The science of capital S science was elaborating itself slowly but inexorably. The industry of industrialization at first led to near exponential increases in production and the controlled use of energy. And it became imperative that we watch how we do things and share those observations in order to do things better. And through shared words, I could watch you and you could watch me, and we could cobble together an agreed story thesis as to what was taking place. And equally important, in the word sphere was the new way of being towards words and the proliferation of rational discourse among the formally, intellectually disenfranchised. And it allowed errors and misstatements to be weeded out, excised from the canon of everyday knowledge earlier and more expertly. Science is a canon of relatively proved hierarchies of abstraction and technique. We don't pay a lot of attention to the work of science as debunker in chief. Debunker in chief. Debunking, disproving, and consigning to the trash bin all those now historically marked as inaccurate memes that the species used to cherish and live by. Debunking. In the mind sphere, there are many, many dead-end, useless, and self-limiting, and even pernicious ideas and memes. Mankind had been wandering in the weeds of egregious error for quite a long time. Negative criticism was crucial in finding a doable path forward. Part of the elaboration of truth is to rub out the false. And if I'm not genius enough to generate earth-shattering new ideas, I may very well be quite good at cracking open other people's ideas, rummaging around in what they put forth, and criticizing, tearing off sillinesses and obvious absurdities, sweeping away incoherencies. And I can get rich and famous doing this to boot. This too is extremely powerful. Half the world tries to create, and the other half tries to find error or fault. And much is weeded out. And we start to accept generally the standard model of the world. This is part of the reason that the standard model has been accepted as truth so completely. Modern criticism has become near instantaneous and withering. Groups and whole cultures pore over proffered texts, legitimizing ideas and some experiences that are imprimatoured, while poking holes in even the most beloved sacred cow dogmas and previously universally, naively, acquiesce to truths. Organizing all the tools of logic and analysis to weed out what might sound titillating and interesting, but turns out to be falsely premised. The modern mind was creating itself and spreading like wildfire. Those are two different metaphors. The idea from computer science of using a large number of weak processors joined in parallel to tackle usually intricate problems that the individual processor would never be able to solve is more than mundane to this explication. It is exactly analogous. Individuals united. The idea from cognitive science of the embodiment of iterative mind loops, the extension and perfecting of thought processes via tools, proved algorithms, and standard applications, all this also applies. In computer science, individuals and groups develop algorithms or encoded and encoding tools that can be linked together. Each algorithm encodes and constrains how data is worked upon. More generally, whole population of scientists, cobblers, and storytellers of every persuasion began to work on tools and specialized algorithms applied to their specialities, began to perfect parts of tools, parts of engines, parts of theories to benefit their co-constructors. Metaphorically, there is spreading out and expanding the somewhat limited abilities of the thinking apparatus, crutching the limitations of the mind, of short-term memory, for example, to hold more than a small bite of information, and then to process parallel co-authored streams of inputs. And expanding means of communication resulted in the outsourcing of components of algorithms. Soon enough, everybody was using pen and paper to do math, and it vastly increased cognitive potential. And then electric waves, telegraph, telephone, and then electromagnetic waves, radio, radar, etc., started getting into the act, allowing parts of the whole to know more and more, getting closer to instantaneous awareness of what other parts of the whole were thinking, working on, etc. Much more could be processed more expeditiously by individuals and groups. Hundreds of millions of people could share and experience the same data. Watch Gone with the Wind, know what Galileo had opined. Millions could munch on the same meme, think about it and talk about it. Feedback loops of every variety became faster, then almost instantaneous. Scientifically, a coherent rationalization for why the modern era created itself, in a nutshell, might be: in the body, memory and thinking and all experiencing appear to be created by neural net-coded basal ganglia thalamocortico feedback loops. This is us. This is our thinking. This is our brain in the natural state, most literally and fundamentally. And the modern mind appeared by the elaboration of complex reentrant looping of many and varied organic processing modules, individual humans, that allow complex patterning and pattern recognition of embodied knowledge. The mind, both conscious and unconscious, is parallel processed feedback and feedback loops, allowing us to navigate the natural world. Then the cerebrum added what the modern word mind is made of: another layer of symbol processing. Modern culture intensified and amplified the competence of the feedback loops. The printing press began a radical externalization of knowledge, most literally, and generated a radically different procedure of symbol processing. External speech became stably incarnated in the environment and manifested itself as library. Library was eventually democratized. Attention span became measured in months, years even, and the limits of short-term memory were superseded. The data of memory became spread out. The somewhat feeble actions of the individual brains was replaced by gang processing of groups, of culture. Truth testing was standardized and democratized, and whole worlds of false assumption were excised. And there was a simultaneous explosion in the number of differentiating abstraction symbols, words, bequeathed to us in the Noosphere. Words reproduced more efficiently, and the number, quality, and depth of encoding of words expanded beyond imagination. And we shouldn't forget that the world population was exploding at the same time. In 1600 or so, it is estimated that the world population was 500 million. Soon, millions and then billions more processors became available. And the democratization of reading further enhanced the chain reactions. A bit of an aside. The modern cri de coeur concerning the overwhelming onslaught of knowledge, its scope and depth of specialization, and the difficulty digesting this onslaught can be seen as the wail of the individual processor, inundated with more signals and more complex signals than it can cope with. At this level, and as we examine the historical genesis of the word mind, we can understand the developing pressure, now a near compulsion, to introject bodies of knowledge into the individual and into the fertile minds of children at every level, multiplying the number of weak processors, us, allows for many and more abstruse problems to be tackled and solved. Implanted knowledges are the software that allows the hardware, brain tissue, to process the data, extended knowledge structures. Introjecting knowledges implants automatisms and guild-generated algorithms that become part of the brain's software architecture. It's as if specialized skills become usable subroutines of the thinking apparatus. With the mechanization of knowledge information processing and the development of specialists and guilds of specialists with access to wider and wider fields of symbols, the species soon experienced explosive success. Science and technology, and in particular, health sciences, changed the rather sorry lives of agriculturalists and city dwellers, lessening the scourge of disease and improving nutrition. Literacy for more than the 1% added more and more processors to the remarkably new fission process of our mammalian thinking machine that gained momentum. Critical mass had been reached by intensifying aspects of shared cogitation and the proliferation of now mass processable ideas and data. A revolutionary new shared consciousness promised a new species of mind. Individuals conversant with and skilled at word and symbol processing quickly became ascendant and massively reinforced with fame and wealth. Healthier bodies from improved nutrition for the average citizen and extended lifespans enabled completely novel brain mechanisms to evolve themselves, and many and varied bodies of knowledge to be implanted. Larger and larger groups coalesced into differentiated strata of cultural producers, focusing and yet expanding and intensifying the whole explosion. It may even be that consciousness, evolved by culture and now beginning to show itself more predictably in more optimally functioning brains, changed fairly radically for humans. The center of experience moved from complex mammalian perceptions and competences of every kind to the noosphere, to the culture of the word. We became the first and only word processing primate, and the word self superseded all other experiencing. It seems that all that has been described above intensifies, as if we've unleashed a Moore's law of mental technologies. If we look at the underlying process, that is, of knowledge processing being sharply focused and distributed, and of guilds of specialists working coherently on self-definition and then self-perfection, we see connections from the 16th century to the present in new lights. Plus, let's not forget, a determining part of the process has been the mechanization of childcare and schooling. The dominant culture, guilds, purveyors of knowledges, stumbled upon the nuclear chain reaction of education, condition, and softwire the brain to revel in words. Implant standardized sciences and automatisms of every kind, and start as early as possible. Erase silly belief patterns that have no power to multiply human dominance, and watch us, humans, go to town. And as more and more grown-ups participated in the complexifying speech sphere, they sensed that they could open up new avenues of success for their children by industrializing the process. Give the kids to the experts for 16 or so years. And because the revolution was taking place in the word world, in the space of reproducible, sharable tokens, slowly predictable, perfectible data was almost immediately transferable. Slowly perfectible data was almost immediately transferable. As soon as Einstein knew what he knew, we could all know what he knew, from Kalamazoo to Timbuktu. Knowledge became almost infectious, downloadable to all human word processors, at first slow, weeks or months over the oceans and deserts and mountains, but soon enough at light speed. Chinese and European and Hindustani cobblers, savants and engineers, rationalists and all sentient word processors could compare techniques and operational variables and inject knowledges into each other's cultures overnight, almost as soon as they arose. Napoleon could use Machiavelli's genius. Generals could compare battles, seamstresses, exotic patterns. Economists could try and ameliorate quickening exchange mechanisms. Business could perfect itself by stealing other business ideas. A bright European idea would ignite in Hindustan almost as soon as it originated, and vice versa. A world mind began to operate, although haltingly at first. And almost as important, stupid ideas could be weeded out of the world's canon of prejudices. Thousands of critics worked in parallel, poring over, talking about, analyzing, comparing, trashing. A bit of an aside. Charles Mann illustrates a somewhat analogous and somewhat contemporaneous flourishing of ecological interactivity that also profoundly modified the life of the planet, partially dependent on the lightning-quick changes taking place in culture and of necessity, knowledge and technology shared at historically unprecedented speeds. The noosphere mutated the biosphere, and vice versa. Exact causal sequences are probably impossible to differentiate in all this. But if the very fabric of experience of the mind was changed at its core, one can see how both history and science technology sped up. Then, almost at the same time, the species, the data kingdom, we creatures living more and more in word worlds, learned something else new. We were learning more and more to parallel process the now extended knowledges that were being refound and created anew, and then a new wrinkle was added. Some individuals, and then it became a group process, as it must, began to turn its becoming more precise knowledge back on itself. At some point, it was inevitable for cobblers to scientifically look at cobbling, for astronomers to look at how they were looking at the heavens, for makers generally to look at how they made things. Tools perfected themselves to make better tools. Minds began to watch and publish scholarly papers about how they thought and see themselves at a distance. Externalizing knowledge allowed the knower to know itself in hitherto unimagined ways. The system interacted with itself to self-control and self-perfect. And more specifically, scientists of every ilk and engineers of diverse ilks, producers of myriad ilks, began to watch and analyze how they went about their work. The bases and the basics of science and invention and technologies began to be scrutinized. both in very practical and production matters, but also more generally, we began to question and delve into the techniques and practices of production and think about amelioration of tools, process, and outcome. A genius of the now quickly evolving mammalian word processing brain was that there came a time that it could start to look at word process, the word processor, map the mapper, that it could look at itself. After all, eyes could look in the mirror and watch eyes work. Thoughts could be about thinking itself. And equally important, new technologies multiplied to make fantastically precise discriminations in every field. The individual brain body, me, may well have been to some degree unself-conscious, knowledgeable and competent, yet without the very complex autobiographical self-awareness that we take for granted, unself-conscious until recently. Likewise, the global species consciousness may not have had the ability to self-reflect or self-critic in the manner that it has learned in the last few hundred years. And just like when the perceptual apparatuses are self-created and perfected, made more competent, made better able to differentiate stimuli, made faster by subsuming complex processes and algorithmizing them. When the perceptual apparatuses are self-created and perfected, at the same time, processes of culture, production, and science rationalized parts of their own functioning. Gangs of seekers, searchers began consciously exploring their own functioning, spreading out awareness and inviting much expanded parallel processing to ameliorate every aspect of behavior and materials, tools, technique. Cultural evolution, almost of a bootstrap variety, but immensely powerful. And much like the genesis of complexified brain automatons for thinking, this allowed whole new discriminations and realms of environmental encounter. Tools themselves, microscopes, telescopes, stethoscopes, ophthalmoscopes, oscilloscopes, etc., gave birth to proliferating, discriminating words, which attracted more word processors, us. When mankind learned to scrutinize and assess and modify its own core process of generation of ideas, technologies, fields of knowledge, it brought a roiling synergy of novel creation into existence in a very short, historically speaking, time. Undreamt of domains of knowledge and praxis sprung into being and began modifying all other knowledges. Plus, because of the now radically expanded and speeded up and interconnected word world, the gains and insights of each field, some of the technologies, and much of the abstract practical tools that worked in one domain could be applied to sister domains with immediate fruitfulness. If novel thinking is extending and sharpening and tweaking metaphors, compare Douglas Hofstadter and Emmanuel Sanders' books, having varied, selectively focused, individual parallel processing, a domain of knowledge, generates a powerful synergy. Let me say that again. If novel thinking is extending and sharpening and tweaking metaphors, having varied, selectively focused, individual parallel processing of a domain of knowledge generates a powerful synergy. Words became flesh. The word world created itself in the human mind and co-created that very mind. And it created itself in space and time in ways undreamt of until recently. There seems to be a quite close analog between how culture has become able to cross-communicate, compare, and cooperatively process high abstract data chunks and the brain's own inherent processes. It's as if we've stumbled onto accumulators and expanders of basic perceptual cognitive skills, resulting in unexpected arising of perfected domains of competence. And it flourished. It dominated and domesticated the planet. It rewarded itself by security. The species became near invulnerable compared to past historical experience. It rewarded itself by security and the proliferation and the material abundance of the world that was until then undreamt of. The mind neither saw itself being created, how could it, nor does it see its everyday workings, its processes. But it, we, I, was more than willing to reap the benefits of our perfecting of ourselves and of our domination of myriad echoniches. And in the exceptionalistic exuberance of our triumph over nature, we, all our glumped individual selves, learned to have absolute faith in the reality of our everyday experiencing, in our stories about ourselves, and in the truth of the myriad sentences that constantly churn through our minds and are reiterated unendingly by our cultural mouthpieces. While what we missed and still don't see is that what is happening is that the work of humanity has become standardizing and perfecting all the recently externalized knowledges. The work of humanity has become standardizing and perfecting all the recently externalized knowledges. Words are implanted in our minds by our parents and our environment, and the flywheel of knowledge begins to spin, and it will until we die. The corpus, or what I call the modern canon of knowledges, came to exist as a physical incarnation, as a thing that held knowledge stably, and a thing to be worked on by myriad upon myriad processors. First, it was diverse libraries that held the extended knowledges that humankind was elaborating at a furious pace. Then, various recording media, from vinyl to cassettes to DVDs, etc., encoded both speech and visual data of many and various forms. Finally, the world has become honeycombed with troves of compressed and cross-related knowledges. Knowledge seeks to become immortal. As for us humans, when one processor passes, another takes up the work. The individual mind grinds away at its lines of code, its subfield of experimentation, its conundrums. And finally, the group mind believes, and the canon is enshrined. This view of the nature of the world, I don't think I need to remind you, radically restructures nearly everything. With the appearance and the elaboration of the transmissible and processable data world on Earth, of extended knowledges, brain-based universal implantable automatons, instantaneous transmission of perfectible symbols, etc., the cerebrum not only found its place and purpose, but bootstrapped a mechanism to multiply its amazing pattern recognition potentialities. The word world, the broader functioning human culture, established its genius. The data world perfects itself via human brain tissue, non-consciously and somewhat idiosyncratically. Simultaneously, each and every functioning of the species has been fiercely differentiated and word-i-fied. And we've learned to better and better conform our minds and our children's minds to words by culture. And we found that it is good. High abstraction and the typically human universal attribution of theory of mind also allows us to radically personify the cultural universe. Both universes of our mind space and of our data space. We've deified nature, glorified ourselves and our mental genius through myth and cult. We don't much question the deepest veracity of our thinking and wordifying. We're also past masters at reifying every thought or meme. It is also very pleasurable and secure-making to project idealistic and Hollywoodized versions of who we are, where we're going, and of course, how we originated. Pleasurable and very good. Religion and history and pop science and most early philosophical tropes seem to get it backward from the beginning, finding significance in the individual above all. Individuals read, word logic process what they've read, but the canon itself is worked on and perfected. This is clearest in the sciences. Both the environment and the functioning of the knowledges in trained brain changed radically, not the individual. The environment and the functioning of the knowledges entrained brain changed radically, not the individual. And it's more than apparent recently that the sheer quantity of knowledges has far outstripped any individual's ability to work on even the smallest fraction of the whole. So where does the knowledge reside actually? Many, 99%, of the ideas that I think about came into my mind by an exterior agent's, another person's, talk or print. In that sense, the knowledge is coming from outside myself. Likewise, when a scientist, writer, pundit reads and reworks ideas or theories, the knowledge is absorbed from the culture and processed anew by the individual. Implantation of knowledges offers the opportunity to grow individuals who will ameliorate, expand, and make more precise the canon, and at times generate whole new and unique metaphors, that is, fields of study. Implantation of knowledges results from repetitive human symbol processing that co-creates neural mechanisms facilitating recall, algorithms, and procedural automata. The growth of knowledges and technologies have, in significant ways, bootstrapped themselves into existence, using Homo sapiens sapiens, processing pattern recognition skills, and malleable brain as vehicles. Importantly, the individual doesn't perfect his or herself through work on the canon of knowledges. It is actually perfected knowledge that has perfected humanity in every possible way. Maybe not perfected, but jolted, discombobulated, sped up, fed and clothed, etc. Perfecting instrumental technologies and transferable procedural knowledges radically changed every possible personal eco-niche, and eventually the overall biosphere itself. Created the Anthropocene, created the realm of man. And you won't be surprised when I opine that perfecting extended knowledges also led to radically changed mental, cerebral, biological functioning of Homo sapiens sapiens.